Imagine that you are about to have an audition to play a very important person. I'd like to help you right now to prepare for your audition. The first thing that you might do as you prepare to become a very important person is to think about how you hold your center of gravity. Some people hold their center of gravity low in their body, maybe in their hips. Some people hold their center of gravity up high above their head. For the purposes of your audition, go ahead and try holding your center of gravity right here at the top of your chest. How does that make you feel? How do you hold yourself? What happens with your shoulders? What happens with your chin? What might you do with your arms? Maybe you cross them. Maybe you put them on your hips. Maybe you point randomly at people around the room with authority. And maybe when you're pointing, you say, "I've got this." Go ahead, give it a try. I've got this. I've got this. I've got this. All right. I can see some very important people in the room today. Now, we've all had this experience, haven't we, of playing a role, whether in our personal lives or our professional lives. We wear certain clothes. We say certain things. We carry ourselves in a certain way. And if you've had the experience of playing a role, then you've probably also had the experience of checking in with your different audiences to see how they're receiving your performance. And you've probably also checked in with yourself to see how you're doing and maybe even to ask yourself if you believe in the role that you're playing. I've had this experience a lot in my life, probably most dramatically when in the times when I went from being an actor to being a healthcare executive. And tonight, I'd actually like to share with you how I initially figured out how to play the role of a healthcare executive. And then some lessons I learned along the way of how I incorporated the principles of improvisation into that role. And then I'd like to share my hope with you for how healthcare leaders will play their role as they move forward. In the early 2000s, I was living in Chicago, working as an actor, teaching, studying, and performing improvisational theater with incredible people in amazing places. This is a picture of me from that time. I was a pretty cool guy, I'll admit it, and I was having a great time. Now, when I say I was working as an actor, probably more appropriately, I was acting for free a lot of times in the evenings, and I was working as a temporary office employee in offices around Chicago. So this picture may be slightly more on point. Now, I loved my time in Chicago, but after a few years, I was starting to think about what might be next in my life and in my career. And through a series of serendipitous events, I applied for and got a job as a speaker with a large, well-known healthcare consulting firm in Washington, D.C. So in just a series of months, I went from performing on stages in Chicago to giving speeches in front of CEOs and physicians at hospitals across the country. I knew nothing about healthcare, and it was scary. So what do we do when we're scared? We often cling to what we know. And so since I knew acting, I tried to figure out how to play the role of a healthcare executive. And like any wise young person, I started by first seeking wisdom in television. Unfortunately, there aren't many great lessons about how to play a healthcare executive on TV. Usually, they're represented in one of two ways. One is as the evil, greedy villain who is the foil to the good-natured rascal Dr. House and Friends. And the other way healthcare executives are represented on TV is just by not being present at all. Dr. Gray and her fellow residents have things covered on their own. And so I looked a little bit closer into the real world and saw very clearly that hospitals are valued for the clinical services they offer their communities. And those same hospitals are often the largest employers in those communities that they serve. And so almost by definition, the healthcare executives in those institutions are pillars of the community. Those same executives also generate a lot of economic growth because they love to build things. Here are just a few examples of multi-billion-dollar healthcare cathedrals that are being built in cities across the country right now. Finally, I studied the mission statements of hospitals across the country to understand how they represented themselves. And I saw very consistent, bold, ambitious language. The biggest, the best, the safest, the highest quality, the lowest cost, transforming the lives of the people that we serve. And I would suggest that Sharp Healthcare in Southern California probably had their mission statement dialed up about as far as it can go, because they say in their mission that we will be the best health system in the universe. In the universe. So what do these lessons teach me about playing the role of a healthcare executive? You need to be bold. You need to be confident. You need to be a teller, a doer. You need to be a pillar of the community, a cathedral builder, a galactic ambition leader. And so that is the role that I learned how to play. And as I traveled around the country, it was reaffirmed in the people that I met as I learned from them and mirrored their performances back to them. And eventually I became a healthcare executive myself. And I continued to refine and shape my performance. And when I checked in with different audiences, I got a lot of good feedback that they were buying the performance I was offering. But when I checked in with myself, I sometimes wasn't so sure. I was clearly playing the role as intended, but something was missing. And I began to wonder if there might be some lessons from my previous work in improvisation that could apply to my role and help me to offer a more authentic performance. So I started to share some of this with the people that I worked with. And when you start talking about improvisation with people, you often get pretty consistent responses. The first one is that I could never improvise. People say that all the time, and what they mean is that I'm afraid to improvise. You can't talk about improvisation without getting to fear pretty quickly. Fear of being embarrassed, fear of being exposed, fear of people maybe learning who you really are. The next thing I would hear from people is that, yes, we understand that leaders need to improvise in a crisis, but you only do that when you have to, and otherwise you want things to be under control. And when people start to think about leaders who are improvising all the time, unfortunately, this is the image that comes into their heads. They frequently think about the guys from Whose Line Is It Anyway running their organizations, which doesn't give them a whole lot of confidence. And the final thing that I would hear from people is that they kind of like the idea of improvisation, and in particular, they really like the golden rule of improv, which is yes and. This is a simple but profound idea. You say yes, you accept the idea that's offered, and then you say and. You add to it. And we can actually try this out between us right now. Let's go with the opposite of yes and to start. We can talk about what we might have for dinner, and I'll offer you some suggestions, and all you collectively as a group need to do is say no, thank you. You got that? All right, so what should we have for dinner? Roast beef. All right, thank you. So, hey, let's have roast beef for dinner tonight. No, thank you. Okay. Maybe we'll just have a light salad. No, thank you. Okay. You know what? We can just go out for ice cream for dinner instead. No, thank you. Okay. Should we just go for a walk and maybe burn some calories? Okay, all right, fine. So we got that idea. Let's flip it around a little bit. And this time when I offer a suggestion of where we might go on vacation, all you need to do is say, yes, let's do it. So where might we go on vacation? Caribbean. The Caribbean. Let's go to the Caribbean for vacation. Yes, let's do it. All right, and I'll buy a fancy new bathing suit for the beach. And we can eat shrimp cocktails every night for dinner. Yes, let's do it. And we'll watch the sunset over the beach. Yes, let's do it. All right. Now, that's clearly an artificial exercise, but I'm willing to bet that you've had versions of that conversation, both of those conversations, with people over the last few days, possibly with some of the people that you're sitting next to right now. So, when I introduced the idea of yes and to folks, they liked it. And it made me feel good when I saw leaders beginning to incorporate this language into their script. But then something strange happened. The words were being said, but the performance seemed a bit off. I would hear two leaders talking, and one leader would say, yes, and, right in the middle of another person's thought before she even finished speaking. Or a group of people would be speaking, and you could see someone gearing up for what they wanted to say, and then they would say yes, and again on things that were totally unrelated to the conversation of the group. And probably worst of all, I would hear the most senior leader in the room say yes, and, with an edge to it that meant no, and it's probably in your best interest to shut up. So, as simple as this seemed, I realized you couldn't just take the words and drop them into the script. You needed to actually work on the performance itself. And this touches on an experience that healthcare leaders have been having across the last year and a half. When leaders are improvising in many cases, but yet they're also scared, and they're clinging to the same script, the same role. This is one of the reasons why when leaders are making bold proclamations about the new normal, about their commitments to anti-racism and justice, even voicing simple words of thanks, those words are sometimes falling cold to the people within their organization. It's nothing wrong with the script itself. The words are fine, but there's something lacking in the performance. And so it made me realize that as simple as yes and is, there's an opportunity to unpack it and think about the universe of practices and ideas that can be taught and shared to help to enhance the performance of leaders. When we say yes, we do many things simultaneously. We say yes to ourselves. We establish ourselves in the present moment. We shut up and listen to the words that are being said and to all of the inputs around us. One of the most important ways we can say yes to ourselves is to acknowledge the role that status plays in our interactions. Many leaders are taught to manage by walking around. They eventually have to get out of their offices and go see the people that they work with. I tried to follow this principle myself as well, and this is actually a candid picture of me when I was managing by walking around a few years ago. Many of you have probably experienced this one, right? A very important person descends into your workspace, and you have to kind of try to act normal and have a conversation with them. Now, when leaders bring the status of their title and then play a status similar to King George when they interact with those that they're leading, they're almost constitutionally incapable of offering an effective yes. I've made this mistake a lot in my career. I would show up in front of a group of leaders. I would be wearing my suit. I would have my perfectly polished presentation about our universal goals and ambitions, and I would get a lot of blank stares and maybe a few very polite questions about needing more resources or more staff. It was only when I let go of the costume, let go of the script, and went along with some of those people into a patient room and watched them care for people directly that I was able to offer a yes that was even more appropriate and needed for that moment. So once we offer our yes, we often want to jump into an and, but we have to remember the comma that comes between. We all know people that don't seem to be aware that commas exist. They just plow forward with proclamation to proclamation. But the comma is really important for us to look back on our yes, to make sure that we are checking our own ego, our own biases, and that the and that we offer is appropriate for the moment. And then we offer our and. We add a brick. We accept that there are no mistakes, there are only gifts. We do something that is right in the moment. One of the hardest things for improvisers when they first get on stage is to learn the lesson that they should only add a brick and not a cathedral. The idea here is that you shouldn't come onto the stage with everything all figured out and try to control it, but you should just offer one idea at a time and let the magic happen from there. This is a really hard thing to do when you first get on stage because you're scared. And it's also a hard thing for leaders as well. We like cathedrals. They are solid. They are safe. They're a place that you might seek refuge if you're feeling scared. It's a lot harder to seek refuge behind a brick. And for an important leader, it may feel insignificant, unimportant, or even embarrassing to simply offer your brick and let it go. But when leaders have the courage to do just what is needed and nothing more, something amazing happens. Others on the team offer their brick, and brick by brick, something beautiful gets built that reflects the collective genius of the group and is maybe quite different than what the leader would have built initially. There's a final lesson for us in terms of how to impact our performance as leaders. And it comes from an unexpected place. In the Buddhist tradition, there is a meditation called the 5 Remembrances. And they go like this. The first remembrance says, I will get old, and I can't escape it. The second remembrance says, I will get sick, and I can't escape it. Are you feeling the good vibes so far? The third remembrance says, I will die, and I can't escape it. And the fourth remembrance says, everything I care about and everyone I care about will change, and I can't escape being separated from them. So maybe a little heavier than you were expecting, but certainly full of truth for all of us, and particularly for those in healthcare. But like a lot of good dramas, there's actually a twist at the end as we get to the 5th remembrance. My actions are my only true belongings. I cannot escape the consequences of my actions. My actions are the ground upon which I stand. When I first learned to play the role of a healthcare executive, I learned to be a pillar of the community, to be a builder of cathedrals, to be someone who demonstrates galactic ambition. And in a lot of ways, I was rewarded for that performance. But recently, I've decided to let go of the role and focus on the performance itself, and figure out ways to help leaders to improve their own performance, not by getting smarter or commanding the room more effectively, but by exploring different ways to show up through presence, through practice, and through play. Healthcare leaders right now are undergoing the performance of a lifetime. The stakes are incredibly high, the spotlight is really bright, but their old way of playing the role just isn't working anymore. We need leaders who can improvise, not in moments of crisis as they try to get things back under control, but all the time, by demonstrating activated, courageous mindfulness in the way they show up, in the way they engage others, in the scenes they create with the people that they lead. We need leaders whose actions are the ground upon which they stand. The final piece of unpacking a yes and comes from the 3 dots at the end. We need to place our brick and let it go. This can often be the hardest thing for a leader to do, especially a very accomplished leader. We place our brick, we let it go, without expectation, without the need to control what comes next, with the confidence in the collective genius of the people around us to do what is needed in that moment. We face our fears and we walk towards them. We say yes to the moment. We honor the pause of the comma. We place our brick and we let it go. Thank you.